I drove 12 hours in a snowstorm to surprise my family for Christmas, after paying off their $40,000 medical debt, and they locked me out. My sister texted, "We didn't ask for you to come." I said nothing. I just turned around, drove back, and didn't answer their calls. That night I logged into my bank account and pressed one button, and now they're going crazy. I drove 12 hours through a snowstorm, my trunk packed with $1,500 worth of carefully selected gifts, just to stand on my parents' porch while they pretended not to hear me knocking. I'd already paid off their $40,000 medical debt without telling them, thinking it would be the perfect Christmas surprise. I imagined their shock and relief when they found out, how it would feel to finally give back after all they'd done for me growing up. I thought it would make us feel like a real family again. I was wrong. As I pulled into their snow-covered driveway, I could see the soft, flickering glow of their Christmas tree through the living room window. The familiar, warm sight took me back to childhood for a moment, to simpler days of homemade ornaments and clumsy gift wrapping. I parked and hurried up the icy steps, my breath coming out in sharp, white clouds as I rang the doorbell. I could hear voices inside, clinking glasses, the faint strains of Christmas music. I knocked harder, then leaned in to ring again, letting it ring a little longer this time. Nothing. I pulled out my phone, my fingers stiff from the cold, and sent a quick, cheerful text to my sister Amy. "Hey, I'm outside." "Surprise!" A moment later, my phone buzzed, and I felt a flicker of relief. But then I opened the message. "We didn't ask you to come." I just stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. I looked up at the door again, half expecting it to swing open and them to come running out, laughing, maybe even scolding me for not calling first. But the door remained closed, the warm glow inside casting shadows through the thick curtains. I tried calling them, but it went straight to voicemail. I even tried my parents' numbers, but they either couldn't hear their phones over the music or just didn't want to answer. I took a step back, the presents clinking in their bags, the snow starting to pile up around my boots. Then I felt the cold for real, the biting wind cutting through my jacket, the sting settling in my bones. After a few minutes of standing there like a fool, I turned back to my car, my head buzzing with a mixture of shock and anger. I backed down the icy driveway, my headlights catching the edge of my dad's old pickup truck parked next to the house. I could see their Christmas tree through the window, a cluster of blurred colored lights. It was as if the house itself had turned its back on me. As I pulled back onto the main road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, I realized I didn't have many options. It was too late to find a decent hotel in this small town, especially on Christmas Eve. I could have just started the long drive back to Chicago, but the roads were getting worse and I was already exhausted. Then I remembered my grandmother. She lived alone, just 20 minutes away on the outskirts of town. I'd planned to surprise her the next day, too, thinking I'd split my time between my parents and her. But now it seemed like she'd be the only family I'd see this Christmas. I felt a pang of guilt for even considering a hotel instead. She hadn't spoken much to my parents in the past year, some petty family dispute I never got the full details of, but I knew she'd welcome me. As I pulled into her long, snow-covered driveway, her porch light came on. I hadn't even reached the door when it creaked open and I saw her small frame, wrapped in a thick, faded cardigan, peering into the darkness. She blinked for a second, then her eyes lit up as she recognized me. "Michael," she said, her voice a little shaky but full of warmth. I stepped inside, the rush of heat and the smell of lavender and old wood wrapping around me like a long-forgotten hug. She pulled me into a tight embrace, surprisingly strong for her small frame, and I felt some of the tension slip from my shoulders. As I sank into her worn couch, she fussed over me, insisting on making tea despite my protests. I pulled out my phone again, the screen lighting up with missed calls from my parents and sister. I ignored them. I couldn't deal with whatever explanations or excuses they had right now. That night, as I sat sipping the too-sweet tea she brought me, I tried to shake off the chill of the locked door, the cold, blunt text from Amy. I should have gone back to Chicago. I should have stayed in my apartment and called it a quiet Christmas. But I stayed, and that one decision would set off a chain of events I could never have predicted. Part 2, The Confrontation. I barely slept that night, my mind replaying the scene at my parents' front door. I kept picturing my father's confused expression when he finally found out what I'd done for them, my mother trying to downplay her mistake, insisting it was a misunderstanding. I expected some kind of explanation, maybe an apology. But nothing came. The next morning I awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of my grandmother washing dishes in the kitchen. She had already laid out a small spread for breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and a few slices of the same crumbly, slightly burnt bacon she always overcooked. I forced a smile, not wanting her to see how tired I was, and joined her at the kitchen table. "You don't look so good, Michael," she said, her wrinkled eyes narrowing in concern as she set a chipped mug of coffee in front of me. "Did something happen?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I hadn't told her what had happened. She and my parents had been on the outs for a while, and I didn't want to drag her into the mess. But I couldn't lie to her either, not with her sharp eyes looking right through me. "I tried to surprise Mom and Dad last night," I said, staring at the steam rising from my cup. "But they wouldn't let me in." She paused for a second, her hand hovering over the sugar bowl. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of anger in her eyes, but it passed quickly, replaced by the same quiet, measured calm she always wore. "Well, that's their loss," she said firmly, dropping 2 sugar cubes into my cup. "I'm glad you're here." Before I could answer, we both heard the crunch of tires on the snow outside. My stomach tightened as I looked through the frosted kitchen window and saw my dad's old truck pull into the driveway, followed closely by my sister's little hatchback. I felt my pulse quicken as a wave of mixed emotions washed over me: relief, anger, maybe even a little hope. My grandmother's jaw tightened. She straightened, wiped her hands on her apron, and gave me a quick, knowing look. "Stay here," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, the way it used to be when I tracked mud through her house as a child. I watched as she marched to the front door, her back straighter than I'd seen it in years. I heard the door creak open, then the low, muffled rumble of my father's voice. My sister answered, her tone quick and defensive, but I couldn't make out the words. I thought about joining them, but something in my grandmother's tone kept me rooted to the chair. After a few tense minutes, the front door slammed and my grandmother came back into the kitchen, her lips pressed into a tight, thin line. She took a deep breath, leaned against the counter, and met my eyes. "They want to talk to you," she said, the words heavy. "But I told them they wouldn't come in until they apologized for last night." I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, she continued, her voice steely. "And until they remember how to treat their own son." A new wave of gratitude washed over me. I'd expected her to try to smooth things over, to urge me to forgive and forget, but instead she had chosen to stand by me. I felt a knot in my chest loosen, just a little. "Thank you," I said, my voice coming out softer than I'd intended. She just gave me a small, firm nod, then turned to refill my coffee. I could hear my sister's voice growing louder outside, frustration turning to anger as the seconds ticked by. My phone buzzed again on the table, this time another call from my father. I ignored it, staring at the chipped rim of my coffee cup, my mind already spinning with the beginnings of a plan. If they wanted to talk, they'd have to do it on my terms. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left out in the cold. I woke up on my grandmother's couch to the smell of bacon and the distant crackle of her old radio playing Christmas carols. For a moment, I forgot where I was, my stiff back and neck reminding me that I'd spent the night curled up on a couch that felt smaller than it had when I was a kid. As I stretched, my phone buzzed again. Another text message from my sister Amy. "Where are you?" I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching. I didn't bother answering. I knew exactly what had happened. They'd finally noticed the SUV-size hole in their Christmas plan and realized where I'd probably gone. My grandmother had always been the black sheep of the family, mostly because she wasn't afraid to call my parents on their nonsense. They hadn't invited her for Christmas that year, something about her, causing drama, at a family barbecue last summer. The irony wasn't lost on me. I shuffled into the kitchen, where my grandmother was flipping pancakes and humming Bing Crosby. She turned when she heard me, and her wrinkled face broke into a smile. "Morning, Michael. I made your favorite," she said, pushing a plate of pancakes and bacon across the tiny kitchen table. I sat down, the warmth of her little home seeping into my bones, and began to eat. It felt good to be in a place where I was truly welcome, even though it wasn't part of the plan. Halfway through breakfast, I heard the crunch of tires on their gravel driveway. My grandmother's eyes narrowed and I felt my chest tighten. I already knew who it was. A minute later there was a sharp knock on the door. My grandmother shot me a questioning look, but I just sighed and nodded. She tugged on her cardigan and shuffled over to open it. I heard my mother's voice first, sharp and worried. "Is Mike here?" My grandmother stepped back, allowing my parents and Amy to enter the cramped foyer. My dad's face was flushed, his thick winter jacket dusted with snow. My mom's eyes darted around, landing on me with a mixture of relief and irritation. Amy hovered behind them, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "You didn't tell us you were coming," my mom said, her voice tense. I leaned back in my chair, still holding my fork. "I thought it would be a nice surprise." She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly trying to find the right words. My dad, always the one to get right to the point, took a step forward. "Look, you can't just show up like this and expect us to drop everything," he said, his voice low but firm. I felt a slow, simmering anger rise in my chest. I glanced at my grandmother, who stood with her arms crossed, her sharp eyes flicking between us. "I drove 12 hours through a blizzard. I brought $1,500 worth of gifts, and I paid off your medical debt," I said, each word sharp as a blade. "So forgive me if I thought you'd at least open the door." Everyone froze, the air in the tiny kitchen suddenly heady. My mother's eyes went wide and my father's jaw clenched. Amy shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. My grandmother let out a low, satisfied hum and turned back to the stove as if the matter was settled. I couldn't help but grin a little, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. For once, I had the upper hand. My mother finally broke the silence, her voice a whisper. You paid off our debt?" I put down my fork and met her eyes. "Merry Christmas." The weight of my words hung in the air, each of them processing what that meant, and I could almost see the gears turning in their heads. For a second, I thought maybe this would be the turning point, the moment when they realized how much I'd sacrificed for them, when they finally saw me as more than just a wallet with a pulse. But then Amy crossed her arms, her mouth pulling into a thin line. "You should have asked first." I felt my jaw clench, the last bit of warmth I'd felt for her freezing over. My grandmother's head whipped around, her eyes narrowing on my sister. "Out," my grandmother said, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Now." My parents stood there stunned, but my grandmother didn't give them a chance to protest. She grabbed the door, yanked it open, and gestured outside, the cold air rushing in. I said, "Out." They stumbled back, their expressions a mixture of shock and embarrassment. My dad looked like he was going to say something, but my mom grabbed his arm and pulled him back toward the door. Amy hesitated for a moment, her eyes meeting mine, but I just turned back to my breakfast, suddenly more interested in my pancakes than her excuses. The door slammed shut and the house went quiet again, the only sound being the crackle of the old radio in the background. My grandmother slowly shuffled back to the table, poured herself another cup of tea, and sat down across from me. She gave me a small, knowing nod, the corners of her mouth twitching in a rare, mischievous smile. I felt a wave of gratitude for her, this tiny, stubborn woman who had just thrown my entire family out of her house on Christmas morning. I didn't realize it yet, but I had just set something in motion that I wouldn't be able to stop even if I wanted to. The rest of Christmas morning at my grandmother's house felt almost peaceful. She didn't mention what had happened at the door, and neither did I. We just settled into the familiar comfort of her small kitchen and finished our breakfast, while the snow continued to pile up outside. I almost convinced myself that I had made the right choice by staying. But the peace didn't last. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mom, and she wasn't holding back. "How could you embarrass us like this?" her text read. "You show up unannounced, make us look like fools in front of your grandmother, and then act like we owe you?" I felt my pulse quicken and the pancakes in my stomach turned sour. I should have ignored it, just tossed my phone aside and enjoyed the rest of the day, but I couldn't help myself. I hit call, my fingers shaking slightly as it connected. She picked up on the second ring, her voice already sharp. "Mike, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is unacceptable." I closed my eyes, the familiar rush of frustration and guilt rising. "Unacceptable?" I shot back. "I paid off your medical debt. 40 grand, Mom. I paid it off so you could finally breathe again. And you couldn't even open the door for me on Christmas Eve?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. I imagined her standing in their too brightly lit living room, the perfectly decorated tree behind her, my dad pacing somewhere in the background, and Amy pretending not to listen. "You should have told us," she finally said, her tone shifting to something I recognized, that careful mix of hurt and outrage she used whenever she felt cornered. "We didn't ask for this." I almost laughed. "You didn't have to. I thought family was supposed to take care of each other." She let out a sharp breath. Don't turn this around, Michael. You can't just throw money at us and expect it to fix everything. I felt my grip on the phone tighten, my knuckles aching. You really don't get it, do you? I wanted to help. I thought it meant something. But if you're going to act like this, maybe I made a mistake. Before she could answer, I hung up, my hand shaking as I put the phone down on the kitchen table. I could feel my grandmother's eyes on me, but she said nothing, just refilled my coffee cup with a steady hand. I sat there staring into the swirling black liquid, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It was like a knot in my chest, all those years of being the responsible son, the one who kept his head down, saved his money, did everything right, suddenly feeling like a waste. But then a thought hit me, clear and cold as the wind outside. I was still in control. I'd been too generous, too quick to forgive, but I still had one card left to play. I pulled my phone closer, my fingers moving quickly as I logged into my bank account. A few clicks later, I found the transaction history for the medical debt payment. There, nestled among the payments and confirmations, was a small, easily overlooked button. Reverse payment. I hesitated, my heart racing, my grandmother's voice faintly humming on the radio in the background. They didn't want my help. They'd made that clear. And I wasn't going to continue to be their safety net if that was how they were going to treat me. I clicked it. The screen flashed for a moment, then refreshed, and the balance returned to its original, crushing number. $40,000 in medical debt, reattached to their names, ready to come crashing back down like a wave. I sat back, feeling a strange, bitter satisfaction. I wasn't sure if I'd regret it later, but for now it felt good. My grandmother finally spoke, her voice calm but with a hint of agreement. Sometimes you have to remind people where their true loyalties lie. I looked up at her, that mischievous glint still in her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. The day after Christmas, I packed my bags, ready to head back to Chicago. I'd had enough family drama to last a lifetime, and I figured my grandmother could use some peace and quiet, too. I was halfway through stuffing my clothes into my duffel bag when I heard the sound of tires crunching over gravel. I stopped, my heart sinking. I looked out the window and felt my jaw clench. My parents' SUV was pulling into the driveway, Amy's car right behind it. I walked to the front door, trying to decide whether to lock it or just face them. Before I could decide, my grandmother shuffled in from the kitchen, her eyebrows knitted in that matter-of-fact way she always got when my parents showed up unannounced. She shot me a look, and I saw the same fire in her eyes I'd seen the day she'd kicked them out. "Stay here," she muttered, her voice low. She yanked the door open before they could even knock. I heard my father's booming voice first, echoing through the snowy yard. "Where is he? We need to talk." My grandmother planted herself in the doorway, her thin frame somehow filling the entire room. "He doesn't owe you anything." "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be," my mother cut in, her voice sharp. "We just need to talk to Mike." Amy's voice floated up behind them, softer but with the same irritation. "This is ridiculous. He's being so dramatic." I felt a new wave of anger at that. Dramatic? I'd driven 12 hours through a blizzard to surprise them, to pay off their debt, and they'd locked me out like a stray dog. My grandmother crossed her arms and refused to budge. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here after the way you treated him." My father stepped forward, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. "Ma, this is none of your business." "Oh, it is my business," she snapped, her voice taking on an edge I rarely heard. "This is my house, and if you're here to bully him into fixing your mess, you can turn around right now." I stepped into the hall, my hands clenching into fists. "It's okay, Grandma," I said, moving to stand next to her. My parents' eyes locked on me, and for a second, the whole house felt too small, too cramped, the air heavy with all the unspoken resentment that had built up over the years. My father's face darkened, the veins in his neck standing out. "What the hell did you do, Mike?" he said, his voice deep, like a growl. I crossed my arms and met his gaze. "I took back what was mine." My mom's hand shot up to her mouth, her eyes wide. Amy just stood there, her expression frozen in shock. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction as the realization hit her. They must have checked their accounts that morning, seen the crushing weight of this debt back on their shoulders. "You can't do this," my mother finally choked out, stepping forward as if to push past my grandmother. I took a step forward, my grandmother stepping aside just enough to let me stand in the doorway, my breath fogging in the icy air. I just did. My father's face turned red, his fists clenched at his sides. You think you can just mess with our lives like this? After all we've done for you? I felt a rush of cold, angry adrenaline, the kind that makes you forget the cold and the consequences. You mean like raising me? That's not a favor, that's your responsibility. I jabbed my finger at him. I'm done being the backup plan, the one you call when things get rough. You made it clear I wasn't part of this family when you locked me out on Christmas Eve. Amy finally found her voice, her face contorted with anger. You're so selfish, Mike. You can't keep this on us. I almost laughed, the absurdity of the situation hitting me all at once. Selfish? I paid off your debt without asking for anything in return. I tried to surprise you, to give you a Christmas without the stress of those bills, and you shut me out. How is that selfish? My father took a step forward, his jaw set. You need to fix this. I felt my grandmother's hand on my shoulder, a calm, reassuring presence. I took a deep breath, my eyes never leaving my father's. No. I don't. For a long moment, no one moved. The cold wind howled through the open door, snowflakes swirling in the hallway. Finally, my grandmother stepped forward and closed the door with a firm click. I heard the muffled sound of my parents shouting from the other side, their voices rising and falling, but I didn't care. I turned and sank into the old chair by the fire, my heart still pounding, my hands shaking slightly. My grandmother moved to stand beside me and put her hand on my shoulder again. She didn't say anything, just stood there, her eyes on the crackling fire, the shadows flickering against the old wallpaper. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the fire soak into my bones, and felt a strange, unexpected calm settle over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my life, like I had finally drawn a line that couldn't be crossed. I hadn't planned for things to turn out this way, but now that they had, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to go back. 2 days after my parents stormed off my grandmother's porch, I packed my car and prepared to leave. The roads had finally cleared, and the bitter cold had given way to a crisp, bright morning, the sun making the fresh snow sparkle like shattered glass. I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread as I threw my duffel bag into the trunk. My grandmother stood on the porch, her cardigan pulled tight around her frail shoulders, watching me with a quiet, proud expression. She hadn't said much after the showdown at the door, just kept me well fed and left me to stew in my own thoughts. I owed her more than I could ever repay, but I couldn't stay. I needed distance, a chance to clear my head and figure out what kind of relationship, if any, I still wanted with my parents. As I slammed the trunk shut, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting another angry text from my dad or a snide message from Amy. But it wasn't either of them. It was my mom. Please come back to the house before you leave. I stared at the message, my breath fogging in the cold air. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, just getting in the car and driving away without looking back. But something in the wording, the simple, almost pleading tone, made me hesitate. I glanced back at my grandmother, who was watching me closely, her sharp eyes catching the flicker of indecision on my face. She gave me a small nod, as if she already knew what I was thinking. Go on, she said quietly. Sometimes people need a shock to see what they've become. I took a deep breath, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled out of her driveway, the snow crunching under my tires. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house felt different. Quieter. There were no Christmas lights blinking in the windows, no music blaring out into the cold. It looked like a normal, tired old house, its bricks chipped and its roof sagging under the weight of years. I walked up to the door, hesitated for a moment, then knocked. This time it opened almost instantly. My mother stood there, her face drawn and pale, her eyes red as if she hadn't slept in days. She stepped back and let me in without a word. The warmth hit me like a wall, and I smelled coffee and the faint, lingering scent of pine from her now bare Christmas tree. My father was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. Amy was there too, perched on the edge of the couch, her face a mixture of embarrassment and regret. I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking into place like a lock on a cage. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, my father looked up, his eyes meeting mine. Mike, sit down. I crossed the living room, my boots squeaking on the old wooden floor, and dropped into the chair across from him. My mom moved to stand behind him, her hand on his shoulder, her eyes fixed on me as if she was afraid I'd disappear as she looked away. I don't know where to start, my dad said, his voice rough like gravel. We screwed up. Amy shifted on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself, looking small and insecure. My mom's hand tightened on my dad's shoulder. We took you for granted. We were wrong, Mike. About a lot of things. I sat there silent, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't expected this. Not the humility, not the remorse. My father cleared his throat and stared down at his calloused hands. I checked the debt this morning. You really did pay it off. And then you took it back. I thought you were just messing with us, but your grandmother made me see otherwise. I frowned and looked at him. What do you mean? She called us, my mother whispered. Tore us a new one, to be honest. Said we'd turned you into a bank account, that we'd forgotten what it meant to be a family. And she was right. Amy finally looked up, her eyes glassy. I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to act like that. I didn't know how to handle it all. The room went quiet again, the low hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I felt a tightness in my chest, a slow, twisting knot of anger and relief, the bitter edges of betrayal beginning to soften, just a little. My father looked me in the eye, his voice calmer, the bluster gone. I'm not asking you to fix this, Mike. I'm just asking for a second chance. A chance to actually be a family again. I sat back, my mind racing. I'd come here expecting another fight, more excuses, more recriminations. I wasn't prepared for this, for the crack in her armor, the raw, unguarded honesty. I looked at my mother, her eyes shining with unshed tears, then at Amy, her face contorted with guilt, and finally at my father, his head bowed like a man trying to find his way back to solid ground. I took a deep breath, the air still tinged with the faint, bittersweet smell of pine, and nodded slowly. I can try, I said, my voice harsh, surprising even myself. But things have to change. My father nodded, his eyes shining. They will. I promise. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I'd thought I'd lost, the sense of family, of connection, however fragile. As I stepped back out into the cold, my breath coming out in short, white puffs, I felt a strange, uncertain warmth in my chest, like the first hint of spring after a long, brutal winter. I wasn't sure if things would ever be the same again, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance.